The thing about a press box is that it's built to keep you separate from the crowd. Soundproof glass thick as a fist. Climate control that hums at a temperature no stadium hot dog ever reaches. Your own elevator that opens behind a badge reader and a key fob, and a polite nod from a man in a blazer who has memorized your face over a season. For 22 years, I narrated games from inside that bubble, and I always thought of it as the best seat in the building. The day everything changed, I learned it was something else entirely. It was a fishbowl, 60 feet above 78,000 people, with 2 ways out and no way down that didn't put me in the water with all of them. My name is Daniel Reyes. I'm 51 years old, and that afternoon I was the lead English language play-by-play voice for a quarterfinal at MetLife Stadium in East Rutherford, New Jersey. It was the kind of late summer day the Meadowlands does so well and so cruelly. 91 degrees on the field, humidity you could wear like a wet shirt, the sky a flat, hot white that turned the upper deck into a griddle and made the grounds crew water the pitch twice before kickoff. The match was barely underway, maybe the 7th minute, when my spotter, a kid named Marcus, leaned into my eye line and pointed at section 134, lower bowl, near the corner flag. He didn't say anything into the headset. That was the first wrong thing. Marcus narrated everything. Jersey numbers, substitutions, the brand of someone's boots. The kid couldn't sit still or stay quiet to save his life. But now he just pointed, and his finger was shaking, and his mouth was a little open like a word had died on the way out. A man down there was biting the woman next to him. Not shoving, not fighting, biting, with the kind of focus you only see in animals that have stopped being afraid of consequences. His shoulders were hunched and still, the way a dog goes still over a bone. And that stillness in the middle of all that motion was what my eye caught even before I understood it. And the strangest part, the part I couldn't make sense of in that first half second, was that the people around them were cheering because on the field someone had just won a corner. And from 60 feet up, a bite and a celebration look almost exactly the same. Bodies leaning together, mouths open, arms coming up. The brain fills in the story it expects, and the story I expected was a man hugging his wife over a corner kick. And so, for one full second, that's what I saw. And I've never trusted my own eyes the same way since. Before I take you any further into that booth, I want to say something quickly. Thank you to everyone who keeps coming back for these stories. And if this is your first time here, welcome. If grounded survival stories like this one are your kind of thing, subscribe, leave a comment, and stay with me, because it genuinely helps the channel keep going. Now let me get back to what happened, because that corner kick was the last ordinary thing that stadium ever did. I'd been calling games long enough to know the rhythm of a crowd the way a sailor knows the sea. A crowd has a heartbeat. It surges and settles, it groans and it roars. And underneath all of it, there's a baseline hum that never stops. The sound of 78,000 bodies breathing in the same room. 78,000 conversations and rustles and shifting feet braided into one low, continuous tone that you stop hearing the way you stop hearing your own house. You learn to feel the wrongness in it before you can name it, the way you feel weather changing in your knees on a damp morning. And in the 90 seconds after Marcus pointed, the hum changed. It got a texture I'd never heard in 22 years. A ragged edge moving through section 134 like wind through wheat. People turning, standing, some of them climbing over seats away from something, and others climbing toward it because they thought it was a fight and they wanted to see. And that mix, that contradiction of people fleeing and flocking at the same spot, made a shape in the crowd that didn't belong to any game I'd ever called. My color analyst that day was a former national team defender named Tom Whitfield. English, 60 years old, a big slow man with hands like a bricklayer and a voice that had narrated more disasters than mine ever would, just on the field instead of off it. He had played in front of crowds that threw flares and coins, and once, he liked to say, a folding chair that he still believed had been aimed at his head specifically. Tom kept talking. That was his job and his instinct, to fill silence the way a man whistles in a dark cellar. And so while I was staring at section 134, he was breaking down the corner routine in that warm, gravel voice, talking about near-post runs and zonal marking. And the producer in my ear, a woman named Priya running the truck out in the lot, was counting down to the replay. Nobody in that production chain had seen what Marcus saw yet, because the broadcast cameras were locked on the ball, and the ball was 40 yards away from the first bite, and a camera only knows what you pointed at. I keyed my talkback to the truck. That little button under my right index finger I'd pressed 10,000 times. I said, "Priya, get me a camera on 134, lower corner. Something's happening in the stands." My voice came out flatter than I felt, the trained broadcast calm holding even as my pulse climbed. She said the polite, automatic thing a good producer says, that they'd take a look, that we don't cut to crowd incidents during live play, that security handles it. Standard. Correct even, by every rule we'd ever operated under. You don't put a fan fight on a global feed. You give the man in the yellow vest his moment to do his job, and you stay on the football. And I want to be fair to her, because Priya did more right that day than almost anyone. And the woman saved lives before the afternoon was over. But in that moment she said no. And the moment cost us 30 seconds. And 30 seconds at MetLife that afternoon was the difference between a calm announcement and a stampede. Let me tell you what the building was, so you understand the box I was trapped in. MetLife Stadium, seats around 82,000 for football. And they'd configured it close to capacity for the tournament. Every aluminum bench warm under a body, every aisle a calculated width, every exit modeled on a computer somewhere to empty the place in 8 minutes flat under perfect conditions. The press level sits high on the west side, a long glassed-in gallery running along the upper deck, above the suites, above the club, above the steep fall of the lower bowl. Behind us was the broadcast row. Individual booths like ours, soundproofed, each one a little glass coffin with a counter, 3 monitors, a tangle of XLR cable, a box of throat lozenges, and a window onto the pitch that turned the loudest stadium in the country into a silent movie when the door was shut. To leave the booth, you stepped into the press concourse, a carpeted hallway the color of wet cardboard with the media workroom on one side and the interview rooms on the other. The elevator bank in the middle and a single fire stair at each end, north and south, marked with a little green running man that I had walked past every game day for 2 decades without once reading. Those stairs were the thing I'd never once thought about in 22 years. And they became the only thing I thought about for the next several hours. The first scream that made it through the soundproofing was not a scream of pain. It was the sound a crowd makes when it stops being a crowd. I've heard a stadium gasp at a missed penalty and roar at a winner and go dead silent when a player lies too still on the grass, but this was none of those. It was a fracture, a high collective intake of breath in section 134, thousands of lungs catching at once, and then the standing wave of people pushing outward in every direction, which is the worst possible thing 78,000 people can do, because a crowd that pushes outward in a bowl has nowhere to go except into itself. The geometry is a trap. The bowl shape that lets everyone see the field also means every direction away from the center is into the back of someone else. I watched it spread on the giant video boards, 4 of them, each the size of a tennis court, hung at the corners of the roof because nobody had thought to shut them off. So the screens kept cycling their automated rotation, a sponsor's logo, a slow-motion replay of the corner, a smiling animated mascot doing a little dance, while below them, in the real seats, the actual stadium began to come apart. The contrast of it I will never lose. The mascot grinning 40 feet tall while under his cartoon feet, the lower bowl turned to chaos. Tom had stopped talking. That was how I knew. More than the screams, more than the boards. Tom Whitfield stopped talking. He'd taken off one side of his headset, the foam cup hanging against his jaw, and he was leaning toward the glass with both big hands flat against it, and his breath had fogged a little oval below his chin. He said quietly, off air, the talk back dark, "Danny, that's not a fight." I said, "I know." He said, "People don't run from a fight." And he was right, in the way only a man who'd stood inside 100 crowds could be right. A fight draws a crowd inward, tightens it, everyone craning. Whatever this was, pushed people away with the specific violence of self-preservation. And the only thing I'd ever seen do that to a stadium, the only thing that empties a section outward like a drop of soap in greasy water, was fire. Priya came back in my ear, and her voice had changed. The polished broadcast cadence, the smooth count and cue she could do in her sleep, was gone, and under it I heard the person. She said, "Daniel, I've got security comms patched in the truck, and they're calling a code on the lower west. Multiple aggressors. They're saying it looks like a..." And then she stopped, and I heard her swallow, an audible click in my headphones, because the word the security supervisor had used over his channel wasn't a word any of us were trained to say on a live broadcast or anywhere else with a straight face. She said, "They're describing people biting people. Plural. It's not one guy, Daniel. It's spreading." That was the moment the professional part of my brain and the human part of my brain split into 2 people standing in the same skull. The professional knew that 8 million households were watching, that I had a responsibility to the broadcast, that you do not panic on air, that the job is to be the calm voice when everything else is noise. The human had a daughter named Sofia, 19 years old, a college sophomore with her mother's stubbornness and my bad knees, who had begged me for 3 months to bring her to a World Cup match, who had texted me a photo of her ticket with 11 exclamation points, who was at that exact moment sitting in section 232. Club level, west side, 300 feet to my left and 1 deck down, with my brother-in-law Gabe, who'd promised over a beer to keep an eye on her while I worked. 300 feet. I could have hit it with a thrown baseball. It might as well have been 300 miles. I keyed the talkback and I told Priya I needed her to find Sofia on a camera. Section 232, West Club, look for a navy jacket. My voice cracked on her name and I heard it crack and I didn't care. And Priya, God bless her, didn't tell me no this time. There was a half-second pause, and then she said, "Copy. 232. I'm pulling cameras." Just like that. Professional again, but on my side now. And I understood she'd made a decision too. That she'd quietly stopped running a broadcast and started running a rescue. Then the stadium's public address system came alive, and a calm, recorded woman's voice, the same pleasant voice that tells you where the nearest restrooms are and reminds you that smoking is prohibited, said that due to an incident in the seating area, fans should remain calm and await instructions from event staff. It played twice, and the second time it played, the lights in the bowl went to full house brightness mid-match. Every fixture in the roof slamming on at once, which has never happened in the middle of live play in the history of the sport. and the referee finally stopped the game and stood looking up at the lights with his whistle still in his mouth. And 78,000 people understood all at once, in a single shared heartbeat, that something was wrong, and the bowl turned into a single animal, trying to claw its way out of its own skin. I have called dramatic finishes. I have called a stoppage time winner that made 80,000 people lose their minds at the same instant. I have called an injury so bad that the whole stadium went quiet enough to hear the player crying. I have never, before or since, heard a sound like the one that came up off that field when the house lights snapped on. It wasn't loud. That's the thing I can never make people understand. It was the opposite of loud. For about 2 seconds, the entire stadium went almost silent. The silence of a held breath multiplied by 78,000. The lull before a wave turns over. And then it broke, all at once, into a roar that had no joy in it. None. A sound with claws in it. And I felt it come up through the structure and into the glass under my hands. A vibration in the soundproof window that the soundproofing was never built to stop. Marcus, my spotter, the kid. He was 24, and this was his first tournament. The biggest thing that had ever happened to him until it became the worst. He pulled his headset off, the cables snagging on his chair, and stood up so fast the chair rolled back and hit the counter behind him. And he said he had to find the exit. He said it in a high, tight voice that wasn't really to me. And I stood and grabbed his arm. Not hard. I just held it, the way you'd hold a kid about to step off a curb into traffic. I said, "Marcus, look at me. The worst place to be right now is in a stairwell with a crowd. The safest place in this entire building right now is this booth. Because we're behind glass, we're 60 feet off the floor, and nothing down there can crush us up here. Crowds kill people in stairs and at doors, not in glass rooms above the action. So we wait, we watch, and we move smart when we move." He looked at me, and his throat worked, and he sat back down. But his legs started bouncing, the heel of his sneaker tapping a fast, nervous rhythm on the carpet, and it didn't stop for an hour. I'd watched that leg the whole time. It was a better gauge of the situation than any monitor. What I'd said was true. The booth was, for the moment, the safest place in the building. That was also the trap. And I knew it even as the words left my mouth. Because safety that you can't leave isn't safety. It's a holding cell. And a holding cell is only safe until the thing you're hiding from learns where the door is. I was about to learn exactly how thin the line between the two could be, and how fast it could vanish entirely. The first organized voice we heard came not over the PA, but over the security channel Priya had patched into my headset feed. A flat, scratchy channel under the studio audio. The sound of real radios in a real emergency. A stadium operations supervisor, a man identifying himself only as Ops Command in the clipped way these things are done, was trying to run a textbook protocol. And you could hear him trying, hear the training in him fighting the chaos. He called for a controlled evacuation of the lower west sections, vomitories 1 through 6, directing fans up and out through the main concourse to the parking lots. It was the right call for a normal emergency. A fire, a bomb threat, a structural concern. You move people out and away from the hazard. You get them into the open air of the lots where there's room to breathe. Standard, correct. The protocol was beautiful, and the protocol was useless, because it assumed the danger had a fixed location you could move people away from. A fire that stays where the fire is. The danger in Section 134 had legs. It moved with the crowd, inside the crowd, hidden in the crowd. And every person who got bitten and went down, and then got back up a minute later wrong, became a new source of panic in a new part of the bowl. A new Section 134 blooming somewhere else. And you cannot evacuate away from a hazard that is walking out with you in the same direction, wearing the same jersey. I watched it spread on the boards and through the glass with my own eyes. The two pictures slightly out of sync. The screens showing their cheerful rotation. The real bowl below showing the truth. Priya killed our broadcast feed around then. She told me later that the network had cut to studio, that some executive 3 states away in a control room had made the call to pull the live cameras the moment the security audio confirmed casualties. And I understood it. You don't broadcast people dying on a Saturday afternoon. But it meant that the 8 million households watching at home now knew less than the people inside the building. And the people outside the building, the tens of thousands still in the parking lots and the fan zones and the long security lines, knew almost nothing at all. And were still trying to get in. That ignorance outside the walls became its own killing force, and I'll come to it. That detail mattered more than almost anything in the first 20 minutes. And it's the part nobody who wasn't there ever quite grasps. The crowd was a two-way river. Inside, 80,000 people were trying to get out. Outside, in the tailgate lots where the smell of charcoal and lighter fluid still hung in the hot air over abandoned grills. In the train plaza where a fresh load had just come off the NJ transit cars from Penn Station. In the long switchback security lines where people had been waiting 40 minutes in the sun to get through the magnetometers. Thousands more were still trying to get in. Drawn by the noise, thinking the roar was excitement, thinking they were missing a goal. The two rivers met at the gates and the turnstiles and the security checkpoints, and they jammed. The doors that were designed to let a stadium empty in 8 minutes were now holding 2 crowds pressed against each other from opposite sides. And a door that's holding a crowd from both sides doesn't open. It becomes a wall made of people, a hydraulic press of human bodies. And people don't survive being part of that wall. Most of the dead that day died there, at the ordinary gates, and never saw a single aggressor. Tom found Sofia before Priya's cameras did. He'd been scanning section 232 with the high-power binoculars we kept in the booth for spotting substitutions and reading the names off the backs of warm-up bibs. And he said, suddenly, his voice tight, "Danny, 232, look, your girl? Blue jacket, top of the section." I grabbed the binoculars out of his hands, the rubber eye cups still warm from his face, and swung them across the bowl, and the lenses jittered with my pulse until I braced my elbows on the counter the way you'd steady a rifle. And there she was, Sofia. Standing on her seat in the club level, which was higher and more contained than the open lower bowl and hadn't broken into a full crush yet. Her dark hair come loose from its tie, one hand shading her eyes, looking up and across the bowl toward the press level, toward me, because she knew where I'd be. She'd always known where to find me in any stadium since she was 6 years old. Top left, behind the glass. That's where Dad lives during the game. She couldn't see me. The press glass is mirrored from the outside, a wall of sky and reflected light. But she was looking right at it, right at the spot where I stood. The way you look at a phone, you know, is about to ring. And Gabe, my brother-in-law, was next to her with his phone pressed to his ear, his other hand on the seat back in front of him. And even at 300 feet through the glass, I could read the rigid set of his shoulders. And then my own phone buzzed hard against my hip. I almost didn't answer it. I want to be honest about that, because it's the kind of thing you don't forgive yourself for, even when nothing comes of it. For half a second, the trained animal in me thought, I can't take a call. I'm working. I'm on air. And then I remembered there was no air anymore. No broadcast, no work. There was only this. And I clawed the phone out of my pocket and answered. Gabe's voice came through fast and thin and climbing. He said, Danny, what's happening? They're saying evacuate, but the stairs are jammed solid. Nobody's moving. They're screaming down below us. Where do we go? Tell me where to go. And I had to make the first real decision of the day. And it was a decision I made with worse information than I'd ever want to make any decision with. Because all I could see was a single slice of the stadium through one window, one section out of 200. And all I could hear was a security channel describing a citywide disaster in scratchy fragments. I told them not to take the stairs. I said it twice. Not the stairs, Gabe. The public stairs are a crush. People die in those. I told him the club concourse had a connector, an interior corridor that ran along the west side and linked the club level to the press level and the suites. An access-controlled passage, badge only, that the catering staff and the suite hosts used. And that it would be far less crowded than the public stairs because the public didn't know it existed, didn't even know there was a door there. I told Gabe to get Sofia to the club concourse west side and look for a gray service door marked Authorized Personnel near the elevator lobby. An unmarked-looking gray door most people walk past 1,000 times. And that I would come down from the press level and meet them on the other side of it, and I'd open it from my side with my badge. I want you to sit with that decision for a second, because I've replayed it 10,000 times in the dark. I told my daughter to leave the relatively contained, relatively calm club seating area and move into a corridor I wasn't even certain I could reach. Behind a door I wasn't certain my badge would open, because press credentials and club-level building access can sit on different zones of the same control system. And I knew that. I knew it as a fact in the back of my professional mind. And I told her to do it anyway, because the only other option I could see through my one window was a stairwell crush. And I just spent 20 minutes watching what a crush did to people in the lower bowl. Watching bodies go down at the front of a vomitory and not come back up. If you'd been 60 feet up in that glass box with a daughter 300 feet away and a phone shaking in your hand and 30 seconds to decide, what would you have told her? I have asked a lot of people that question, and I have never once gotten an answer that sounded certain. I still don't know if there was a right answer. I only know I gave the one I gave, and I gave it fast, the way the building forced everyone to make every choice that day, before you could see the whole board. Then I told Marcus and Tom I was going to the connector door, and Marcus stood up again, his bouncing leg finally good for something, and said he was coming with me. Tom said someone had to stay on the security channel and relay what it said, and that he was 60 and slow and bad kneed and would only hold us up in a stairwell, so he'd hold the booth and be our eyes and our radio. We agreed on a simple thing in about 4 sentences, the smartest 4 sentences any of us spoke all day. Tom would keep his cell phone on an open call with mine, line live the whole time, and he'd tell me what the security channel said and what he could see through the binoculars from his high glass perch, so that I'd have a voice in my ear that could see the entire board while I was down in the corridors and stairwells where I could see nothing but the 6 feet in front of me. It was the smartest thing we did. It also nearly got Tom killed, and I'll get to that too. The press concourse, when I hauled open the heavy booth door, hit me with sound like a wall of water. The soundproofing had been holding back more than I'd let myself realize. And now the hallway roared with it. The crowd noise coming up the open stairwells and the screams threaded through it, and the flat repeating loop of the recorded PA woman telling everyone to remain calm. The carpeted concourse was full of media. Photographers with 2 cameras around each neck and a third in their hands. Beat writers clutching laptops to their chests like life vests. Camera operators in network polos. A couple of on-camera talent still in their pancake makeup with the powder going greasy in the heat. And they were all doing the thing crowds do when nobody is in charge, which is mill and argue and point at the 2 fire stairs and not commit to either. Each person waiting for someone else to choose so they could follow. A network producer I half knew, a heavyset guy named Foley, was shouting that the south stair was clear, the south stair, go south. And a stadium usher in a yellow vest, a woman maybe 60 years old with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a name tag I'll see for the rest of my life that said Margaret, was standing square in front of the north stair with both arms out like a crossing guard, telling everyone the north stair was a no-go, that it fed into the same concourse as the suite level and the suites were emptying into it, and it was already packed body to body. People were ignoring her. People always ignore the person who's actually right when she's telling them something they don't want to hear. And what they didn't want to hear was that one of their two exits was already gone. I didn't go to either stair. I went to the service door, the gray one at the end of the press concourse marked Authorized Personnel in white stenciled letters, the press side twin of the door I'd told Gabe to find on the level below. I pulled the lanyard with my credential and tap card off my neck and put the card flat on the reader, the little gray box I'd badged through 1,000 times without thought. The light stayed red, a small red LED, no bigger than a grain of rice, and my whole afternoon turned on it. I tried it again, wiping the card on my shirt first, the way you do when a card doesn't read, pressing it harder. Red. I tried the third time slow, deliberate, watching the light. Red. And the professional part of my brain, the part that knew this building's bones, understood instantly what that red light meant. And it was the worst possible thing it could mean. In an emergency, a stadium's access control system can be put into one of two states. Lockdown, which seals every interior security door to contain a threat in place, freezes the badge readers, makes every gray door a wall. Or free egress, which unlocks everything to let people flow out unobstructed. Someone in Ops Command, in that hardened room 2.5 decks below my feet, had made a choice. And the choice they'd made, the red light told me with absolute clarity, was lockdown. They'd sealed the interior of the building from the inside, while my daughter was on her way into one of the sealed corridors because I'd sent her there. Marcus said, "What's wrong? Why isn't it opening? Use your badge." And I said, "Lo, I did. It's locked. They've locked everything, the whole building." And I watched him understand it in the same stages I had, the way you watch Newsland on a face. First confusion, a frown, a glance at the reader as if it were the card's fault. Then the realization that the corridors I'd promised to move through were sealed shut. Then the final realization, the one that drained the color out of his cheeks, that this meant Sofia was on the other side of a door I could not open, in a corridor that, if she'd reached it, was now a dead end with a locked door at each end of it. I got Gabe back on the phone with hands that wouldn't quite hold steady, mashing the screen twice before it connected. And I said fast, "Gabe, listen. Do not go to the service door. It's locked. Do you hear me? The interior doors are all locked. They put the building in lockdown. Stay in the open concourse. Stay where there's air. Do not let yourself get funneled into anything that ends in a locked door." And Gabe said the worst sentence I heard that entire day. And he said it in a small, flat voice, the voice of a man already inside the thing he's describing. He said, "Danny, we already moved. We're already in the corridor. We found the gray door and went in like you said. And Sofia's behind me. And there are people behind her. A lot of people followed us in. And the door at the far end won't open. And the crowd is still coming in behind us. And we can't turn around. We can't turn around, Danny." I had told my daughter to walk into a trap, and the trap had closed behind her. And I was on the wrong side of it, with a badge that meant nothing and a red light the size of a grain of rice. Tom's voice came through my other ear, the open phone line, flat and fast and careful, the voice of a man reading instruments in a dive. He said the security channel was reporting that lockdown had been initiated by Ops Command deliberately, as policy, to prevent affected individuals. That was the term they kept using. Affected individuals, from reaching the field and the player tunnels. That the immediate priority had been protecting the two teams and the match officials and getting them out clean through the underground bus route and the loading dock, and that nobody in the command room had accounted for the fans already inside the secured corridors at the instant the doors sealed. The protocol had a cold logic to it, the way a tourniquet has a logic. Protect the smallest, most controllable, most valuable population first. The players and officials. A few dozen people you can move as a unit through a clean route, then deal with the 80,000. On paper, in a planning meeting, with coffee and a slide deck, it made perfect sense. In the corridor where my daughter was standing with strangers pressing in behind her, it was a sentence handed down by people who couldn't see her. I want to tell you I had a plan in that moment. I didn't. I had a locked door, a badge that meant nothing, a wide-eyed kid named Marcus next to me, a 60-year-old man in a glass booth as my only overview of the entire disaster, and a voice on the phone telling me my daughter was packed into a sealed corridor with strangers and the crowd was still flowing in behind her, like water filling a pipe with both ends capped. What I had, the only thing my 22 years had actually given me that mattered now, wasn't broadcasting. It wasn't the voice or the eye or the encyclopedia of statistics. It was the building. I knew this stadium the way you know a house you've worked in for 2 decades. The back hallways and the freight routes and the way the catering carts came up. And more than that, I knew that the access control system that had just locked every door had a hierarchy built into it. That the doors were not all equal, that somewhere in this building there were doors that lockdown was physically, legally incapable of sealing, because the fire code would not allow it. Fire-rated egress doors. The law is absolute about them, and the law is written that way for a reason. You can electronically lock a security door in a lockdown all day long, but you cannot lock a designated fire exit from the egress side, ever. Under any condition. Because if you trap people behind a locked door in a fire, you murder them. And the building code is written in the actual blood of actual people who actually died behind locked doors in burning theaters and factories 100 years ago. Doors chained shut to stop workers from sneaking smoke breaks. So every stadium, every large building on Earth, has a network of stairwells and doors that are mechanically free to open from the inside, no matter what the electronic system has been told to do. Hardware that defeats the software by design. The problem, the thing that made my stomach drop straight through the floor, was that those free doors were exactly the ones Margaret in her yellow vest had been guarding. The public fire stairs, the ones already jammed solid with crushing crowds, because free egress is also where everyone goes. The doors that would open were full of people being crushed. The doors that were empty were locked. That was the cruel arithmetic of the whole building, laid bare in one sentence. And my daughter was in the empty, locked half of it. So that was the geometry of my afternoon. And I want it to be as clear to you as it became to me, kneeling there in my broadcast blazer with a useless card in my hand. The doors that would open were full of crushing people. The doors that were empty and safe to move through were locked. My daughter was in the empty, locked half, behind a door I could not reach with any badge. The only way to get to her was to make a locked door open. And the only person in the building with the authority and the system-level access to override a lockdown sat in Ops Command, which was a hardened room on the event level, all the way down at the bottom of the stadium. 40 vertical feet and the entire crushing bowl, and 2 locked decks between me and it. Marcus asked me, almost a whisper, "What are we going to do?" I told him we were going to find a way down to Ops Command. and we were going to make them open the west connector. And we were going to do it before the crowd in that corridor crushed everyone in it against a door that didn't care how hard they pushed. And then Tom's voice cut in over the phone, sharp, and said, "Danny, stop. You need to know something. The affected individuals, the biters, they're in the corridors too now. The channel says they got into the suite level through a kitchen service door that was propped open with a milk crate before the lockdown dropped. So when the doors sealed, they sealed those things inside the secure side with everyone else. And Danny, listen to me. The channel is saying there are aggressors moving through the west interior, the west connector. And Danny, that's the same corridor, that's where your girl is." The whole math of the day changed in that one sentence, the way a board game changes when someone flips it. Until that moment, the danger to Sofia had been the crowd and the locked door. The slow, stupid, blameless violence of physics, of too many bodies and not enough room. Now there was something in the corridor with her that bit people, and then they got up wrong. And the lockdown that had trapped her had also trapped them in the same sealed length of hallway. And the very system designed to contain the threat had containerized my daughter together with it. They were sealed in the same box. The box was working perfectly. I told Gabe I had to, even though every cell in me wanted to lie to him and keep his voice steady. I told him there were aggressive individuals somewhere in the corridor, and he needed to move Sofia away from any open doorway, away from the ends of the hall, toward a defensible spot, a recessed alcove, a janitor's closet, a service nook, anything with one way in that he could watch with his back covered, and that he must not run, because running in a packed corridor starts a stampede that kills more people than whatever they're running from, and that he should move steady and quiet and get Sofia behind him. Gabe is not a brave man. I have always known that about my sister's husband, and I never once held it against him, because most people aren't. And there's no shame in it until the day it's asked of you. But he did something brave then, in the worst hallway in the world. He told me he had Sofia by the wrist, and he was moving her right now, toward a recessed alcove near a freight elevator, a little dead pocket off the main corridor where the cart's staged. And that there were maybe 6 other people coming with them, following his lead because at least he sounded like he knew something, and that he'd hold the spot. And then he said, in a voice I had never once heard from him in 15 years of holidays and barbecues, "Danny, hurry, please." And the line stayed open. And through it, I could hear the corridor, the press of frightened voices, a woman somewhere crying steadily, and far down the hall, faint, a sound I did not want to identify and would not let myself name yet. Getting down inside that stadium during the lockdown was its own descent through circles of a place I thought I'd known like my own hands. The press elevator was dead, frozen by the same lockdown that sealed the doors, sitting somewhere in its shaft with its call buttons dark. A coffin-sized box stuck between floors I'd never have to think about. The only way down was the public fire stair. The south one, the one Foley had been shouting, was clear. And it was not clear, it had simply been less catastrophic than the north one, 20 minutes earlier. And now it was a slow, grinding river of bodies moving down a concrete spiral 2 abreast, shoulder against shoulder, hand on the rail. And the sound inside it was a sound I'll carry forever. The sound of hundreds of people breathing too hard in a space too small. The wet rasp of panic kept just barely under control, a baby screaming somewhere below. The scrape and shuffle of feet that couldn't move faster than the feet in front of them. Here is the thing about a stadium fire stair that the architects know and model on their computers, that the public never thinks about for 1 second of their lives. It's a pressurized concrete tube designed to move people in exactly one direction, down and out. And it works beautifully, like water through a pipe, as long as everyone moves at the same speed in the same direction. The moment anyone stops, Anyone stumbles and goes down. Anyone tries to push back up against the flow to find a lost child or a dropped phone. It stops being a pipe and becomes a meat grinder, because the pressure from behind doesn't know there's a problem ahead and keeps coming. Marcus and I entered the flow at the press-level landing, and we did not try to push or pass. We moved with it, surrendered to it. I put my right hand flat on the shoulder of the man in front of me, a stranger in a soaked dress shirt, and Marcus put his hand on my shoulder. And we became 3 links in the chain, part of the river, because the only way to survive a crowd is to stop being an individual inside it and become part of its motion. We went down 1 level. The landing door stood open and people argued at it. We went down another. The stair was lit by the emergency fixtures, that flat, dead, institutional white that makes everyone look already gone. And at every landing, there was a door to a concourse. And at every door, there was a knot of people frozen in indecision over whether the concourse was safer than the stair. And that hesitation at the landings, that human inability to just commit, was what slowed the entire descending column to a crawl, each clot of doubt backing up everyone above it. At the suite level, 2 floors down, the stairwell door stood open, and the carpeted concourse beyond it was the level where the west connector ran. And I knew that if I could peel out of the river and get onto the suite concourse, I'd be on the same floor as the sealed corridor where Sofia was, separated from her by the locked connector door, but at least on the right deck, within shouting distance, instead of 300 feet and 2 floors away. I leaned close to Marcus's ear and told him we were getting out at the suite level, next landing, follow me and don't let go. Peeling out of that river was harder and more dangerous than joining it had been. We had to cut diagonally across the flow toward the open door. And a crowd in a stairwell resists that with its whole body, because to the people behind you, it looks like you're cutting the line, stopping the flow, and they don't know you have a destination. They saw it and they only feel you becoming an obstacle. A man behind me, big, red-faced, terrified, shoved me hard in the back when I angled for the door, both hands flat between my shoulder blades. And I lost my footing and went sideways into the steel railing and felt my lower ribs hit the rail with a flat, sick crunch. And the wind go straight out of me. And for a second, the gray concrete swam, and I thought I was going down. And going down in that stair meant being trampled. But Marcus had a fistful of my collar, and he hauled me through the open door onto the suite-level concourse with a strength I wouldn't have guessed was in him. And we both stumbled out onto the carpet. And the heavy stairwell door swung shut on its closer behind us, and the roar of the stairwell cut to a muffled thunder through the steel, like a storm heard from inside a house. The suite level was carpeted and quiet, and so wrong it made the hair stand up on my arms. The suites are glass-fronted boxes where the wealthy watch the game with private catering and their own bathrooms and air conditioning set to whatever they like. And the doors of half of them stood open onto the concourse, abandoned mid-afternoon. Plates of food still on the tables under the heat lamps, half-full wine glasses, a child's small jacket draped over the back of a leather chair, a phone still plugged into a wall charging, and, in one of them, a television still glowing, tuned to our own network studio, where 2 analysts I knew by name sat at a desk 1,000 miles away in a clean, bright studio talking with grave faces and folded hands about a developing situation at MetLife Stadium. I remember stopping for 1/2 second in front of that screen, ribs screaming and feeling the full, surreal cruelty of it. That I was standing inside the situation, breathing its air, while 2 men in suits described it from 1,000 miles away, with less information than I had, and a calm I knew I would never feel again as long as I lived. Tom's voice in my ear, urgent. He said, "Danny, where are you? Talk to me." And I got out, between breaths that hurt to take. Suite level, west side. Ribs are bad, but I'm up. He said, Good, the connector's right there, the gray door. But you know it's locked." And I said, "I know. I'm not going through it. I'm going to talk through it." Because here was the thing I'd worked out somewhere in the grinding descent of that stairwell. I might not be able to open the door with any badge. But I could get to it. I could put my body against it. And Sofia and Gabe were on the other side. And a locked door is still a thing you can speak through. And a voice on the other side of a wall in a disaster is worth more than almost anything you can carry. Because the very worst part of being trapped, worse than the dark and worse than the fear, is the certainty that no one in the world knows where you are. I found the gray connector door on the suite concourse, identical to the one above. Authorized personnel in white stencil. And I put both hands flat on the cold steel of it, and I called Gabe's name through the metal and through the phone at the same time. And I heard my own voice come back to me, a half-second delayed and tinny through the phone speaker, which told me the open line was live and working, which told me Sofia was close to the other side of this exact door. And then I heard her. Not on the phone. Through the door. Through 6 inches of fire-rated steel and the dead air gap inside it. My daughter's voice. Thinned and flattened and made small by the metal, saying one word. Dad. Just that. Dad. The way she used to say it from the top of the stairs when she was little and couldn't sleep. And I put my forehead against the cold steel, and I said, "I'm here, baby. I'm right here. I'm on the other side of this door. I'm not leaving this spot. Do you hear me? I am not going anywhere. And I need you to listen to me very carefully now, because we are going to get this door open." What I didn't tell her, what I turned my face away from the door to murmur only to Tom in the phone, was that I had no idea on God's earth how. The override was in Ops Command, 2 more decks straight down. And the only path down from the suite level that wasn't the crushing public stair was the freight elevator that Sofia happened to be huddled next to on her side, which was frozen dead by the lockdown, or the service stair behind a door that the lockdown had sealed shut. I was on the right floor, the same floor as my daughter. And I was just as trapped as she was. The 2 of us standing on opposite sides of the same wall, in the same building, inside the same disaster, separated by 12 feet and a steel plate, unable to close the distance by an inch. Tom solved a piece of it, the first piece. He'd been listening to the security channel the entire time, the whole grinding descent. And he said the magic words. He said, "Danny, listen. Ops Command is talking to a maintenance engineer named Reyes who's stuck up on the suite level, your level, trying to manually release the freight elevators so they can move medical teams down. And Reyes is keyed to the radio channel, and Danny, he is near you. He came up the west service stair to get there, which means the west service stair door is propped or jammed open, which means there's a way down off that floor that isn't the public crush. Find Reyes. Find him now." I found Reyes by following the only thing in all that carpeted, catered silence that didn't belong. A sharp chemical bite of machine oil and hot metal cutting in through the smell of abandoned food. And under it, the clatter of hand tools on a hard floor, around a corner past 3 open suites, to a service panel set in the wall beside the freight elevator. No more than 20 feet from where my daughter was trapped behind the connector wall. Reyes was maybe 40. Stocky, in a gray maintenance uniform dark with sweat between the shoulder blades. Down on both knees in front of an open access panel with a small flashlight clamped in his teeth and both hands buried in a nest of wiring. And when I said his name out loud, he startled so violently he dropped the flashlight. It clattered and rolled. because he had genuinely believed he was the only living thing on the entire floor. And the sound of a human voice behind him was almost worse than silence. I told him fast and clean, no wasted words, who I was, that I was press. That the West Connector was sealed with people behind it, including my 19-year-old daughter. That there were aggressive individuals loose in the same sealed corridor with them. And that he had a working radio to Ops Command, and I needed him to get them to release the West Connector before the crowd inside it crushed everyone against the dead-end door or the biters reached the alcove where they were hiding. Ruiz picked up his flashlight, slowly, and looked up at me with the face of a man who has been making impossible choices for 40 straight minutes and has completely run out of room inside himself to make any more. He said the exact thing I would have said standing in his boots. And he said it not cruelly, but like a man reciting a fact that was breaking his own heart. He said, "Sir, they will not release the West Connector. I already asked them 10 minutes ago for a different reason. And they said no, because the aggressors are in the West Connector. And the entire point of the lockdown, the whole reason it exists, is to keep those things sealed in the West Connector. If they open that door, those things come out onto the suite level, right here, where we are standing, where the medical staging is set up 2 suites down, where I'm trying to free up these elevators to evacuate the wounded. They are not going to trade a sealed corridor full of injured fans for an open floor full of injured fans plus the things that hurt them." He wasn't being heartless. He was telling me the actual reasoning of the actual people in the actual hardened room 2 decks below us, the people who could see a wall of camera feeds I couldn't see. And the horror of it, the real horror that sat in my chest like a stone, was that the reasoning was sound. From where Ops Command sat, the West Connector was a box that contained the threat. Opening it to save the 7 or 8 people inside meant releasing the threat onto the 40 wounded people outside. They had decided to hold the box. My daughter was inside the box, and the people who had decided to hold it weren't villains in a movie. They were exhausted professionals doing brutal arithmetic, making the least bad choice with better information than I had. The same way I had told Marcus the booth was safe, the same way I had told Sofia to take the corridor. All of us making the least bad choice with the information we had and being wrong about the part we couldn't see. I think that was the exact moment the day stopped being about escape and became about something much harder to carry. Because I understood, kneeling on the carpet next to Ruiz with my daughter's small voice still in my ear through the open line, that there was no version of this afternoon where some person in authority would simply choose to open the door and save my child. The system was working precisely as it had been designed to work. And the design had a casualty list folded into it from the start. And Sofia's name was on that list. And the only way her name came off it was if I reached into the machine and changed the arithmetic myself, with my own hands, knowing exactly what it would cost on the other side of the ledger. So I asked Ruiz the question that decided everything that came after. I asked him whether there was any way to release just that one door, locally, by hand, from the suite level, without going through Ops Command, and without releasing the whole zone and the whole crowd of aggressors with it. And Ruiz went very still. The flashlight beamed dead on the floor between us, and then he said, slowly, yes, and then he said, but. And the but was the entire rest of the story, the whole shape of the night to come. Yes, he said, every fire-rated door in the building has a local manual release, a purely mechanical override behind an access panel that lets a maintenance tech free one single door by hand in case the central system fails. Because the fire code demands a mechanical fallback that doesn't depend on power or software, or some man in a room making a decision. But, he said, and here he looked at me with real pity, the manual release for the West Connector isn't on the suite level. It's in the service chase, the gap inside the wall, accessible only through a maintenance hatch on the level below. The club level. The level your daughter was sitting on 20 minutes ago, before you say you sent her up here. The level you pulled her out of. To open the door that frees your daughter, sir, you have to go back down to the floor you told her to leave. The way down to the club level was the freight elevator shaft itself. Because the public stair was a crush, the service stair was sealed, and the freight car was frozen between floors, exactly where Ruiz had been trying to coax it back to life when I found him. He'd already gotten the car's emergency brakes released, but the doors wouldn't open at the suite level because the car had drifted and settled 4 feet below the floor, jammed there with the door motors dead from the lockdown's power cut. There was a gap, a black slot of darkness, a 4-foot drop from the suite level threshold down onto the dusty top of the freight car, and then a roof escape hatch on the car that Ruiz said he could pop by hand from above, and then the inside of the car itself, and then a pry at the club level doors from inside, because down at the club level, the car's lower edge sat just a foot or so above the floor, close enough to climb out. It was a way down. It was also a way to fall down an open elevator shaft into the dark. And I am 51 years old with ribs that had just been introduced to a steel railing and were now stabbing me with every breath. And I stood at the edge of that open, suite-level doorway, looking down into the black gap above the frozen car. And I felt every single one of my years stack up on my shoulders at once. Marcus said he'd go down instead. He said it fast, and he meant it. His bouncing leg finally pointed at something. He was 24 and quick and unbroken, and his ribs were fine. And for one full second, I almost let him. Because it was the rational thing, the calculated thing. Send the young whole body down the hard climb and keep the broken old one up top to coordinate. And then Sofia's voice came through the connector door again, closer now, asking if I was still there. Dad, are you still there? The fear in it rising, no matter how hard she was holding it down. And I knew with total certainty that I could not send a stranger down to be the voice on the other side of that release lever. It had to be me. I told Marcus to stay up here with Ruiz, to keep the radio open, to be the relay between me down below and Tom up in the booth, so that I'd have a voice in each ear the whole time. One watching the entire building from 60 feet up and one standing at the top of the shaft I was about to lower myself into. Then I sat down on the edge of the suite level threshold, in my network broadcast blazer with my useless credential still around my neck on its lanyard. Swung my legs into the black gap above the freight car, took a breath that my ribs hated, and lowered myself down the 4 feet onto the roof of the car in the dark. I want to tell you what it's like to be inside the machinery of a building you have only ever experienced as a polished surface, because almost no one ever sees it and lives in it the way I did for the next half hour. The shaft was raw concrete and grease and cold, genuinely cold. 10 or 15 degrees cooler than the carpeted floors, the trapped air of a chimney that never sees the sun. And it smelled of cable lubricant and old dust and faintly of something electrical and overheated. The emergency lights didn't reach into the shaft at all, so I worked entirely by the wobbling beam of Ruiz's flashlight handed down to me through the gap, and the cold blue glow of my own phone screen propped on the car roof. The roof escape hatch opened under my hands with a screech of unoiled hinges that I felt in the fillings of my teeth and that echoed up and down the shaft. And I froze, certain the sound had announced me to the whole building. And then I lowered myself through the square hole into the car, which still smelled of the catering carts and warming trays it was built to haul. That institutional smell of steam table food. And I stood inside it in the pitch dark and listened to the building groan around me. The deep settling sounds of a structure full of moving, panicking weight. the muffled distant thunder of the public stair coming through the concrete. And under all of it, faint and patient and unmistakably wrong, a sound from below me, from the club level, that I had been refusing to name for half an hour and could no longer pretend away. A slow, wet, irregular sound. Movement in the club level corridor below. Not the fast, frightened movement of a crowd, the unhurried movement of something that had stopped being in any rush because it no longer had a single thing left to be afraid of. The club-level doors of the freight car had to be pried open by hand, and Ruiz had pressed a flat pry bar from his kit into my hands before I dropped, cold steel, the only weapon and the only tool I had. And I worked the flat end into the rubber-lipped seam between the doors and leaned my entire weight against it. And my ribs lit up like a struck match, and the doors gave an inch, then a grinding foot, then enough. And the club-level corridor opened in front of me in a slot of flat, emergency white light, empty in both directions as far as I could see, and silent. Empty and silent was so much worse than crowded and loud. A crowd you understand, a crowd you can read. An empty club concourse on a floor that 20 minutes ago held thousands of people, with the catering still sitting out on the linen-draped carts and a single woman's shoe lying on its side in the exact middle of the carpeted hallway, laces still tied. That's not an empty hallway. That's a hallway that something has already passed through and finished. If you're listening to this somewhere safe right now, wherever you happen to be, I'd honestly like to know where. Drop it in a comment, because in that corridor I would have traded everything I owned to be anywhere else on the planet. And it genuinely helps me to remember that the world is mostly full of ordinary safe rooms with ordinary people in them. Kitchens and couches and parked cars. But I was there, in that one. And the maintenance hatch Ruiz had described to me was 40 feet down the corridor to my left. A low square panel set in the wall at knee height, unmarked, the kind of thing your eye slides right over. And between me and it, the carpet was streaked with something dark and dragged that led around the far corner toward the seating bowl. And from around that same corner, steady and slow, came the wet sound. I went to the hatch. I did not look around the corner. I have spent more hours than I'll admit thinking about why I didn't look, and the truth is plain and not brave at all. And I've made my peace with it. I didn't look because I understood that if I saw what was making that sound, if I let my eyes confirm it, I might not be able to make my legs stay. And Sofia was 12 feet above me on the other side of the wall, waiting for the sound of a door releasing. And the only thing in the entire world that mattered was the unmarked panel at knee height 40 feet down a corridor I had to cross with my back to the thing around the corner. So I walked to it, fast and quiet, heel toe on the carpet, the pry bar gripped white-knuckled in my right hand. And I knelt down at the hatch with my back to the corner and the wet sound, which is the most defenseless I have ever made myself in my life. And I worked the panel open. And inside was the service chase. The dark gap between the walls, packed with conduit and pipe, and the cold concrete backside of all the doors I'd been failing to open all afternoon. And there, mounted on the rear face of the west connector door, exactly where Ruiz swore it would be, was a red mechanical lever inside a yellow housing stenciled manual egress release. The one single thing in this entire enormous building that the lockdown could not touch, could not reach, could not override. Because 100 years ago, people burned to death behind locked doors, and the law would never allow it to happen again. I got Tom in one ear and Marcus in the other. The chain of voices strung all the way up through the dying building from a service chase to a glass booth. And I told them, low and fast, I have the release. I'm on it. My hand is on it. And I turned my head toward the connector door, my mouth inches from the steel. and I told Sofia she needed to listen to me now. That in a moment, the gray door right beside her in the corridor, the one at her end, was going to unlock. And that the very second it clunked open, everyone in that alcove needed to come through it onto the club level and move straight to the freight elevator where I'd be waiting. Fast and together, not running, but moving. And that there were aggressive individuals somewhere in their corridor, so they had to move away from them and toward the door. And that I would be holding the freight car open with my own hands. And Gabe, on the open line, said low and steady, steadier than I'd ever heard him, "I understand, Danny. We're ready." And then I heard him turn his voice away and start organizing 6 terrified strangers into a column behind my daughter. Telling them when the door opens we go together. Nobody stops. Nobody runs. Stay on the person in front of you. The calm, competent voice of a man I had spent 15 years quietly underestimating. And then Tom said the thing that turned the whole rescue into the single worst decision of my life. And he said it because he was the only one of us who could see the entire board from his high glass perch. And a man who can see the whole board has to tell you what's on it, even when you'd rather not know. He said, "Danny, wait. Before you pull that, you have to understand what you're about to do. Because the aggressors in the West Connector aren't only behind your daughter's door. The security channel is mapping them. And they're spread all along the connector. And the instant you release that door, you are not just letting Sofia's group out. You are unsealing a corridor full of those things directly onto the club level. And Danny, the club level connects by an open ramp to the suite level, where Ruiz and Marcus are standing, where they've staged the medical, where there are 40 wounded people who cannot run. And if you open this door, you will send those things up that ramp onto that floor. You will be doing, with your own hand, the exact thing Ops Command sealed this entire building to prevent. You'll save the 7 people in the alcove, and you may kill the 40 on the floor above you." I knelt in that black service chase with my hand wrapped around the cold red lever, and we understood that this was the choice the entire day had been driving me toward from the first bite at the corner flag. The lockdown's logic, the cold arithmetic I had resented and called a death sentence an hour ago, was now my logic, sitting in my own hand, because I was the one holding the door it had sealed. And I had to decide whether to be the man who opened the box. On one side of the lever was my daughter and 6 strangers crammed into an alcove with something coming for them. On the other side of it was a floor full of wounded people who couldn't run. And the 2 men who had helped me get this far, Ruiz and Marcus, who had no idea at all, that the thing I was about to do down here would send the threat straight up the ramp toward them. Tom's voice was shaking now, the gravel gone out of it. He said, "Danny, I'm not telling you what to do. You hear me. I would never. I'm only telling you what it costs. You have to be the one to decide. But I will not let you decide it blind. You have to decide knowing." I asked Marcus, on the radio, voice tight, whether there was any way to seal the ramp between the club and the suite levels. Any door, any barrier, any way to hold the floor above me, even if I unsealed the floor I was on. And there was a long silence on the channel. Long enough that I thought I'd lost them. And then Ruiz's voice came on instead of Marcus's. And Ruiz said slowly, like a man working it out as he spoke, "There is. There's a fire shutter at the top of the ramp. A roll-down steel curtain that drops to seal the 2 levels off from each other in a fire. And it has a manual release too. Mechanical, same as your door, on the suite level side of the ramp. And if you release the connector down there, and I drop the shutter up here at the same instant, I can seal the suite level off completely from whatever comes up that ramp." "But," he said, and there was always a but, it means the shutter comes down between the floors permanently. And anyone still on the club level when it drops anyone not already at the freight elevator and climbing, is sealed down there on that floor with the things from the corridor, and there is no way I can lift it again from up here. So your group, your daughter, they get one route and exactly one route, straight to the freight car and up through the shaft the way you came down. And they have to be climbing before that shutter hits the ground, or the shutter doesn't matter to them anymore. So that was the deal the building laid on the table, the only deal it would offer. Open the connector door, drop the steel shutter, and run a column of 7 exhausted, terrified people 40 feet down a corridor with aggressors spilling out of the open door behind them. Around a corner I'd refused to look around, to a frozen freight elevator, and then up a 4-foot scramble through a roof hatch into a black shaft, all of it before a steel curtain came down and sealed the entire club level into a tomb behind them. And if anyone fell, if anyone froze, if anyone in that column was a half-step too slow, if the wet thing around the corner was faster than I was praying it was, the shutter would still have to come down, because the floor above held 40 lives, and the floor below held 7. And I would be the man who had told Ruiz to drop it. I told Sofia I loved her. I want to be honest about why. I said it through the door, through 6 inches of steel in the dark of the service chase, my mouth against the cold metal, in case it was the last clean chance I ever got to say it to her and have her hear it. And she said it back through the steel, my whole name and then the word. And her voice did not shake when she said it. It came out level and clear. And that steadiness in my 19-year-old daughter's voice, in the worst hallway in the world, with something coming for her, is the thing I have carried out of that entire day more than any horror I saw. She was braver than I was. She always had been. Then I told Tom and Marcus and Ruiz and Gabe to get ready, all of them. The whole chain of voices strung through the broken building. And I counted them down. 3, 2, 1. My hands sweating on the cold lever. And I pulled it. The door released with a heavy mechanical clunk that I felt slam through the entire wall beside me. A sound with weight to it. And on the open phone line, I heard the alcove erupt into motion all at once. Gabe's voice driving them. Go, go, now, this way. Stay together, stay together. And I dropped the pry bar. No, I kept the pry bar. I scrambled backward out of the service chase on my hands and knees and got my feet under me in the club-level corridor and ran for the freight car, ribs screaming with every stride. And behind me, from around the corner I had never let myself look at, the slow, wet sound changed all at once into something fast, because the things in the connector had felt the air pressure change the instant the door opened and around us when they were coming. I reached the freight car and spun around with my back to it, and there they were, coming down the emergency-lit corridor toward me. My daughter first, her dark hair flying loose. Gabe's hand still locked around her wrist, 6 strangers strung out behind them in a ragged sprint. And behind the strangers, spilling around the far corner in a way that the human eye refuses to accept even as it watches the aggressors. And I will not describe them in detail, because the detail was never the point, and I won't put it in your head the way it's in mine. They had been people an hour ago. They moved now like the man at the corner flag had moved, with that same terrible animal focus, and they were faster than I'd let myself believe a thing on 2 legs could be. I grabbed Sofia by the shoulders the second she reached me, and shoved her up into the open mouth of the freight car and toward the roof hatch, where Marcus's hands were already reaching down through the gap from the shaft above, his face a pale smear in the dark. And I pulled Gabe in after her. And the strangers came pouring through the pried-open doors, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I was counting even then. Some cold part of my broadcaster's brain that counts everything was counting human beings into a steel box while the things came down the corridor. And the sixth and last stranger, an older man who'd been at the very back of the column, the slowest, gray-haired, one hand pressed to his side. He was 10 feet from the car and closing when Ruiz's voice screamed in my ear that the shutter was coming down now. Now, Danny, I can't hold it. They're at the top of the ramp on my floor. It has to come down. And in that half-second, I understood the timing had broken, that the floor above was already breached, that the aggressors had reached the suite level before we'd cleared the club level, that Ruiz was dropping the steel curtain to save the 40 wounded, and the act of saving them was sealing us in with a swarm below. I made the second decision in less time than it takes to say it. I lunged out the freight doors and got a fistful of the old man's jacket and hauled him bodily into the car as the first aggressor hit the open doorway behind him, close enough that I felt the air move, and I threw my whole weight against the doors and dragged them shut from the inside and jammed the pry bar crossways through the 2 interior handles. And the doors shuddered and boomed as bodies slammed into them from the corridor, again and again, a wet, heavy pounding. And inside the car in the pitch dark, there were 8 of us breathing in ragged gasps, and 1 bar of cold steel between us and the things in the hall. And above us, through the open roof hatch, Marcus was screaming for us to climb. Climb now. And I lifted my daughter and then the strangers up through that hatch, one at a time, into the black shaft, into the cold and the dark, up toward Ruiz's sealed suite level, where a steel curtain now stood between the living and the corridor I had unsealed with my own hand. We lost no one in the car. I need to say that as plainly as I can, because the rest of what I have to tell you is hard. And I need you to hold on to that one fact through it. All 8 of us made it up through that roof hatch and into the shaft and up the 4 feet to the suite level threshold where Ruiz's hands hauled us out one at a time onto the carpet, gripping wrists and collars and dragging us over the lip. And I came up dead last, my ribs grinding bone on bone. The freight doors below me still booming as the things in the corridor threw themselves against the pry bar that somehow held, and Ruiz pulled me over the threshold, and I collapsed onto the carpet of the suite level and got my arms around my daughter and held her. And for one moment, one single suspended moment, it was over. It was not over. The shutter Ruiz had dropped sealed the ramp between the club and suite levels, and it held. It did its job. But it held the way a finger holds back a flood, by accepting that some water gets through first. The suite level was supposed to be the safe floor, the medical staging, the elevator hub, the place the wounded were being gathered. And it had been, right up until the aggressors reached the top of the ramp in the handful of seconds before the steel curtain hit the concrete, and 3 of them got through. 3. On a floor with 40 wounded people who couldn't run, and a dozen exhausted medical staff, and now 8 more of us. The shutter had sealed the swarm below us, and sealed 3 of them above us, with the very people we'd been trying to protect. And that was the cost Tom had warned me about in the dark of the service chase, arriving exactly as he'd promised it would. Just smaller and more specific, and barely more survivable than the worst case, which is the only mercy a day like that one ever offers anybody. That the catastrophe is merely terrible instead of total. What followed on that suite level was not heroic, and I won't dress it up for you, because the people who were there deserve the truth more than they deserve a good story. It was a dozen ordinary exhausted civilians and a few medical staff and 1 maintenance engineer named Ruiz, and 1 half-broken broadcaster moving 40 wounded people through suite doors and barricading those doors with overturned catering carts and leather furniture and a vending machine. 4 of us walked across the carpet inch by inch, while 3 aggressors worked the floor. And it took the better part of 2 hours, and we lost 2 people in it. And by the end, I knew both their names, because you learn names very fast when you're holding a door shut against the dark with a stranger's shoulder pressed to yours. One was a caterer named Anthony. The other I'll keep to myself. Her family deserves that much. The National Guard reached the suite level a little after dark. A 4-man fire team that came up a cleared service stair behind ballistic shields, moving slow and methodical and exactly the way they were trained. Calling their corners, no heroics, no movie, just discipline. And the relief I felt at the sight of those shields was not the relief of being saved. It was the much smaller, much more selfish relief of, oh, finally, not being the one who had to decide who lived. Do you think I made the right call, pulling that lever in the dark? I have asked myself that question every single day since, in the shower, on the train, at 3 in the morning. And I have asked it of strangers, and now I'm asking it of you, because I honestly do not know, and I've stopped expecting to find out. Sofia is alive. So are Gabe and Marcus and Ruiz and Tom, who held that glass booth alone and was the eyes for every move I made and walked out without a scratch because the press level, 60 feet up behind its mirrored glass, never breached. The fishbowl staying a fishbowl to the end. 6 strangers from the alcove are alive, including the gray-haired old man whose jacket I'll feel in my fist forever. And 2 people on the suite level are not. And 3 aggressors got onto a floor of helpless wounded because of a door I chose to open. And I will never, as long as I live, be able to draw a clean line between the lives my choice saved and the lives it cost, because the building would not let me. The building made every door a trade, every safe place a trap, every rescue a redistribution of exactly who would die that day and who would go home. That was the real horror of MetLife. Deeper than anything with teeth. And I have come to believe it's the real horror of every place ever built to hold a crowd. The infrastructure that makes us safe. The controlled doors and the contained zones and the protocols written in century-old blood. All of it works by deciding in advance, quietly, on a computer, whose box gets held and whose box gets opened. And on every ordinary day of your life, you never once have to know that you are living inside that math. We found out. We learned it by hand. The official count took weeks and then months, and some of it is still being argued in courtrooms I won't live long enough to see the end of. They never used the word that the security supervisor had choked on over Priya's channel in the truck. Not in the reports, not in the press conferences, not in the careful statements read by careful people. They called it a mass casualty crowd event with a contributing public health factor, a phrase built specifically to be impossible to feel anything about. And they talked at length about the crush at the gates, where the 2 rivers met, the one trying to get out and the one still trying to get in, drawn by the noise. And that's the part that ought to keep people up at night, because that's where most of the dead actually were. Not the corridors, not the suites, the gates, the ordinary turnstiles and the security checkpoints, hundreds of people who never saw an aggressor at all, who didn't even know there was anything to be afraid of inside, who died of the oldest and simplest thing in the world, too many bodies pushing through too small a door from both sides at once. The biting. The thing that started in section 134 at the corner flag, the thing that turned a man over a corner kick into something that moved like an animal, that they are still studying, still arguing about behind closed doors, still cannot or will not fully explain. And I have stopped, finally, after a long time, expecting them to. I don't call games anymore. The network offered me my chair back after a few months. Full support, counseling on their dime, a slow-phased return, all of it genuinely kind and well-meant, and I don't doubt a word of it. I sat in a booth one more time during the following off-season. An empty stadium, no crowd, just the grounds crew on the field and me, alone, just to find out if I could. And I put my hand flat on the soundproof glass, the way Tom had put his that day. And I looked down at the empty bowl, and the dead black video boards, and the dark mouths of the vomitories that funnel a whole section down into the concrete dark. And I understood that I would never again in my life be able to see the best seat in the building. I only saw the fishbowl now, 60 feet up, 2 ways out. And the whole great machine spread out below me, full of doors that someone, somewhere, in a hardened room I'd never see, was always, every second, deciding whether to open or to hold. Sophia went back to school that fall. She's all right, or as all right as any of us came out, which is to say she's alive. And she laughs again, and some nights she doesn't. And she does not blame me for the corridor, for sending her into it. And I spent a long time trying to make her, trying to hand her the blame because I needed somewhere to put it. And I finally stopped, because her forgiveness was never the thing I actually needed. What I needed, what I still need, and may always need, is to stop hearing the freight doors boom against that pry bar in the dark. 8 of us breathing in a steel box, the old man's jacket still bunched in my fist. And to stop wondering about the people on the club level we sealed below us when the shutter came down, the ones who weren't at the freight car in time, whose names I will never learn, because there was no door to hold shut beside them. Only a curtain of steel coming down forever between their floor and mine. The building decided who they were. I pulled the lever, and the building decided all the rest of it. The way it was built to, the way they are all built to. Every stadium and arena and concert hall and terminal where they pack human beings in by the tens of thousands and promise them it's the safest, most celebrated place in the whole country to be. If you ever find yourself 60 feet up in a glass box above a crowd, in any stadium, any arena, anywhere on earth, they pack people in by the tens of thousands and tell you you're somewhere safe. Do one thing for me, just one. Find the doors. Not the wide, bright, welcoming ones that everyone streams through, the ones with the ushers and the signs, the gray ones, the ones marked authorized personnel, that your eye slides right past, the ones with the little readers that glow red or green, depending on a decision being made, somewhere you will never be allowed to see. Find them before you need them. Learn where they go. Learn which of them the law won't ever let them lock, no matter what they tell the system, the fire stairs, the egress doors, the mechanical releases behind the panels at knee height. Find them now, while the game is still on and the boards are still grinning, and the hum of the crowd is still just a hum. Because the day the crowd stops being a crowd, and I promise you that day exists for every place like that, the only thing in the world that will matter is whether the door in front of you is the kind that opens or the kind that holds, and you will not have one single second to learn the difference then. I didn't. And I had called that building home for 22 years